Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're diving into something absolutely fascinating. We're going to explore a really rich piece of ancient poetry from the English Standard Version of the Bible, specifically Psalm 9. But hey, we aren't just going to sit here and read it. We're going to tear it down to the studs. We'll be looking closely at both its intricate structure and its massive, powerful themes to really figure out how this text was built and what it was trying to say to its original audience.
Just listen to this powerful opening line. It literally plunges us right into the super passionate, exuberant voice of the psalmist. Right from the jump, we aren't getting some passive observation, right? We're getting a bold declaration of intent. The speaker is stepping right up to the microphone, so to speak, ready to tell a massive story of past triumphs. It's such an energetic start, and it absolutely demands your attention.
So let's start by looking at the actual anatomy of this ancient song.
To really get into this, we've got to look at the literal construction and honestly, the intriguing metadata of the poem. What's wild is the header text at the very top of the source document. Before the actual poem even starts, we get what essentially amounts to ancient stage directions. The text specifically directs the piece to the choir master and then tacks on this highly specific phrase, according to Muthleben.
Now, if you check out the footnotes provided in the source text, this crucial little detail reveals so much about what we're actually dealing with. The footnote explains that Muthleben is probably a musical or liturgical term. What does that mean for us? Well, it means we are looking at a living, breathing, ancient song. This wasn't just static words written on a page to be read in a quiet room. No way. It was meant to be performed, heard, and experienced by a crowd.
The source's footnotes also uncover this totally hidden structural complexity that you'd honestly completely missed if you were just reading the English translation. The text points out an elaborate acrostic pattern that actually links this text, Psalm 9, directly with the next one, Psalm 10. In the original Hebrew, each stanza kicks off with successive letters of the Hebrew alphabet. It's like a giant linguistic puzzle. It's a highly organized, deeply deliberate method of poetic composition that just screams careful craftsmanship.
And this perfectly illustrates that rhythmic, deliberate nature of the poetry we were just talking about. In the first two verses, the poet stacks 4 consecutive I will statements. I will give thanks. I will recount. I will be glad. I will sing praise. Stacking them like that establishes this powerful cadence and an intensely personal intent right out of the gate. It really grounds the ancient song in a rhythm of active gratitude before it, completely shifts gears.
And man, does it shift gears, bringing us to the God of righteous judgment. The narrative arc just takes a huge turn here, moving straight from that personal, rhythmic thanksgiving into a fierce, cosmic vision of divine justice. It draws this really stark binary contrast. On one hand, we see the fate of the enemies, who face everlasting ruins. And that is juxtaposed entirely against the divine figure, the Lord, who, according to verse 7, sits enthroned forever. It's a super purposeful juxtaposition between the temporary, doomed nature of the wicked and the permanent, unshakable throne of divine justice.
The poet uses some incredibly absolute language here in verse 6 to really drive this point home. Just notice the phrasing: everlasting ruins, rooted out, and crucially, the very memory of them has perished. Think about that. In the ancient world, legacy and memory were literally everything. To have your very memory perish, that was the ultimate defeat. The text is emphasizing that the wicked aren't merely beaten in a battle, they are entirely erased from existence.
Moving down to verse 15, the text employs this fascinating poetic irony. It notes that the nations have sunk in the pit that they made. So it's not just that they're being punished by some outside force. Actually, the very traps they set for others become their own undoing. In the net that they hid, their own foot has been caught. This whole concept of ironic self-destruction concludes really decisively in verse 16. The wicked are snared in the work of their own hands. But you know what's really captivating? It's what follows that thought. Right after this definitive, heavy statement of judgment, the text drops 2 very mysterious words, Higdion and Selah.
Once again, the footnotes come to the rescue to demystify these ancient terms for us. The notes indicate that both Higdion and Selah are likely musical or liturgical terms. Scholars usually interpret them as cueing a musical interlude, a pause, or just a moment of really deep meditation for the listener. The poet is essentially saying, the wicked have trapped themselves, now stop. Let the music swell. Just think about the gravity of that.
Following that pause, the tone shifts again, establishing a stronghold for the oppressed. The emotional journey really softens here. In verse 9, the author beautifully balances that intense, terrifying judgment of the previous verses by establishing the divine as a safe haven. The text turns totally away from absolute destruction and moves toward this deeply comforting message for the marginalized. And that repetition of the word stronghold is absolutely key. It basically builds a linguistic fortress right inside the poem itself, offering this reassurance that in turbulent times, there's a secure, unshakable refuge for those who are suffering.
Through these specific promises, the text weaves a really compelling counter-narrative about memory. Remember earlier when the wicked were entirely erased from memory? Well, here, the dynamic is completely flipped. The vulnerable are seen, they are heard, and most importantly, they are remembered. He is mindful of them, he does not forget, the needy shall not always be forgotten. It's a profound promise that the suffering of the poor is absolutely not overlooked by divine justice.
Which brings us to our final movement, the frailty of mortal men. This is a pretty sobering reflection on human mortality and limitation. We see another sharp, thematic contrast built right into the architecture of the song. The text outlines two very divergent destinies. The wicked, those nations that forget God, are said to return to Sheol, which is an ancient Hebrew term for the underworld or the grave. But in complete contrast, the one who is saved is lifted up from the gates of death specifically so they can recount praises in the gates of Zion. It's such a vivid contrast of location and purpose, right? Silent death versus joyful vocal praise.
As we hit verses 19 and 20, the whole thing crescendos with this urgent, almost desperate plea. The psalmist cries out, "Arise, O Lord, let not man prevail." It's a massive call for intervention against human arrogance. The poet is basically asking for the ultimate authority to step in and put earthly powers right back in their proper, limited place.
And then the text just abruptly concludes with this incredibly blunt, humbling reminder of human limitation. Let the nations know that they are but men. Despite all their cities, their traps, and their arrogant strength, they're mortal, they're fragile. And then the whole text is punctuated by one final Selah. Just one last musical pause to let the heavy reality of human frailty really sink into the minds of that ancient audience.
So, what does this all mean for us today? By breaking down the structure and themes of this text, we can clearly see it's not just some dusty historical document. It's a carefully crafted musical exploration of power, oppression, and legacy. And it leaves us with this really provocative thought to ponder. How does confronting our own mortal frailty, just like the psalmist urged those ancient nations to do, alter our own modern pursuit of legacy and justice? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer today. I really hope it gave you a fresh perspective on how to read and appreciate these ancient songs.